Tim Spector, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. They want to focus on calories. That's all that counts. And that distracts us from the fact that we should be eating higher quality food. And that's really what's killing us. Everyone needs to know about gut microbes and gut health if they're going to seriously make a big change to their diet and be healthy. The studies I've read suggest that fiber is much better at reducing hunger than actually having protein. As I said, there's a real link between poor diet, poor gut microbes, poor immune health, and then risk of cancers.
In your mind, what is the biggest myth that's out there right now about eating well? Hello, friends, and welcome to the Liz Moody Podcast, where every week we're sharing real science, real stories, and realistic tools that actually level up every part of your life. I'm your host, Liz Moody, and I am a best-selling author and longtime journalist. And today I am joined by Dr. Tim Spector. Tim is a rheumatologist and epidemiologist. He is a professor of epidemiology at King's College London. He's the author of multiple books, including Food for Life and the Food for Life Cookbook. And this is so impressive, he has published over 900 papers in some of the world's top scientific journals. And he is one of the top 100 most cited scientists in the world. That is just so cool, so mind-blowing. He is also the scientific director at Zoe, which is a company that runs the world's largest in-depth nutrition study. And then it turns that research into a personalized program that gives you insights into how your body uniquely responds to food. And today, he's going to take all of that research, all of that work that he has done in the nutrition world in the decades that he has been working in it, and he's going to use that to help us cut through the confusion and understand what the latest science shows about eating well. Whether your goal is to live longer, to prevent cancer, to lose weight, to have more energy, to heal your gut, anything else, you are going to find incredibly valuable information in this podcast to help you get there. This conversation vastly changed the way that I think about eating well. I have already implemented so many things into my life and seen huge changes already, and I really hope that it's helpful for you too. Also, this episode is part of our free New Year's plan. It is called 21 Days to Change Your Life, a science-backed plan for nutrition, movement, and mental health. You're going to be getting deep dives with top experts here on the podcast every single Wednesday, plus short solo episodes on Monday with my personal best healthy eating tips, mental health shifts, micro habits, and so much more. And then over on the newsletter, we are sharing the entire plan with downloadables, meal plans, workout plans. So much good information is going on over there. Today, we have a 1-week meal plan that we designed based on the information that Tim shares in this episode. So you definitely do not want to miss that. Head over to lizmoody.substack.com, sign up for the takeaway, and you will get the entire plan for free delivered right to your inbox. Okay, without further ado, let's dive in with Dr. Tim Spector. Tim Spector, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you clear up so much confusion that is out there in the food world. We're going to get to the bottom of how to eat well, how to eat to make ourselves feel as good as possible. So I'd love you to just kick us off with how important is food to our health? Some people online say, oh, you can really kind of like just eat whatever you want. It's not that big of a deal. But in your book, you say that it's linked to virtually every disease. So can you give us your take on that?
Yes. The food choices we make every day are the most important choices we can make for our health. And that's has stood the test of time for a long time. There's huge amounts of research behind this. All the studies point to the fact that choosing the right diet can reduce your risk of all the chronic diseases. These are the common age-related diseases that we see all around us by 80%. This is a really major factor. There's nothing else really that you can do that approaches it. So it's really important that people, A, understand how important their diet is, and then B, get the right help to make those tricky food choices. And there's no doubt it is tricky because of all the signals that are people getting to distract them to eat rubbish food from manufacturers and everyone else. So that's why it's a bit of a minefield.
In your mind, what is the biggest myth that's out there right now about eating well? Like, what do you think is the biggest point of confusion?
Probably that there's one quick fix. A magic pill, there's a potion, there's a multivitamin. there's something I don't have to worry about and I can just take it, or I've just got to give up something and all my troubles will go away. They have all these gurus telling them whether it's giving up gluten, whether it's giving up sugars, whether it's giving up fruits, whether it's giving up lectins, whether it's giving up whatever. That's the number one myth. All you got to do is cut out one thing from your diet and everything else is fine. So I think that's the overriding one, because I think people have cottoned on to the fact that calories are no longer as important as they were.
We're going to talk about calories. Actually, let's just get into calories right now. You take a pretty strong stance that we are very much over-indexing on the importance of calories. Can you say why you don't think calories are as important as somebody listening might think?
Yeah, there are a number of reasons. The first is we've been promoting calories as the way to have a healthy diet for the last 50 years. And you need to look around to see how that's failed miserably. All the Weight Watcher type companies that dealt with purely calorie-based restrictions on your diet have now folded and moved over to Ozempic and other ways of selling. They've given up. They're not only given up because of that drug, but because they never really worked in the first place. Or even when you do the clinical trials with really motivated people doing calorie restriction, by the end of 2 years, nearly all of them had gone back to where they were. So you might get an initial benefit, you can lose some weight, but then eventually it all fails, purely based on calories alone.
Yeah, so is that because they are no longer adhering to the calorie restrictions, or is that because they are adhering to the calorie restrictions, but their body is responding differently after a number of years?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but it becomes virtually impossible as your body adapts and ramps up the hunger signals, and your body also reduces its metabolism so that you're not burning the calories the same way. So to maintain that same weight loss, you have to sort of keep restricting even more, and that just becomes impossible.
But in a hypothetical world, if somebody was like really, really good at calorie restriction and they were just like, I'm going to do this number in, this number out, and they stuck to that, would they lose weight over time? Or is there some other mechanism of action at play that would make it so they would not actually lose weight over time?
It depends. People are slightly different. We have a natural evolutionary protection, meaning that when our calories are restricted, as when we were in Africa, we couldn't eat for a few days. Our body responds by trying to protect those calories and make sure that all our energy is conserved. We lie down, we rest. Also, we ramp up the hunger signals so that we're looking for food all the time. So you'd be fighting all those signals to do that. So they've shown that you lose weight initially, but you won't be able to keep losing it at the same rate without increasing even more that calorie deficit. So it gets harder and harder to do that. And there gets a point when your body just won't lose any more weight. It's absolutely designed to keep you alive, and that's why these other systems kick in. So you're fighting nature, essentially, if you're only trying to deal with calories alone. We've been told a lie that everyone can do this and it's just a question of willpower. That's been shown in countless clinical trials not to be the case.
If somebody's listening and they're like, okay, that's cool, but I actually do want to lose weight, what does the science tell us to do instead of calorie counting?
It tells us to look at the quality of the food you're eating rather than the calorie content of the food, because we now realize that for the same calorie content of food, different quality will have different effects on your body. Different foods will have different effects on how hungry you feel after eating it. Ultra-processed food, they've done studies giving, for example, a burger meal that's made from scratch or made in a factory is going to make you 25% hungrier by having the ultra-processed version, the fake food version, compared to the made-from-scratch version. And they've done a whole series of studies for a couple of weeks of people in a sort of closed hospital clinic environment to look at this.
Do we know why that's happening? Do we know what's happening in our bodies that it's reacting so differently?
We know there are a number of mechanisms. We don't know which ones are the most important. The current top ones are, firstly, the junk food is generally softer. It's like baby food. So it's much quicker to eat and digest, gets broken down by the body much faster, and so enters the bloodstream and the gut much faster than real food. And so that can overcome some of the hunger protection mechanisms, the fullness signals that you'd normally get when you're eating a real food, because it's just speeded up. Baby mash, pappy bread that's not real, it's nothing to chew on, you just sort of digest it super rapidly. Your body needs time in order to get the normal signals out, because we evolved that we eat food and then 20 minutes later we feel full, we don't want more.
That's so interesting. I was kind of like, is that true? And then I was thinking like, oh, when you eat like a Cheeto, it dissolves in your mouth. When you eat cereal, it kind of dissolves in your mouth. And when you eat like a salad and you're sitting there just like chomping on it for, 5 minutes.
So we've forgotten how to eat hard food now. And this is all to the advantage of the food companies who basically produce these foods to be not only soft, but they have these super qualities, that what they call hyper palatable, which means the food scientists have actually added fats or sugars or salts in the right combination so that it tickles our taste buds and also tickles our brain, our pleasure centers, to say, this is super exciting. This is giving me a little high that you just wouldn't find in nature. You don't have that mixture of fats and sugars and things like if you get any fruit or vegetable from nature. So that hitting these pleasure centers, that makes you overeat. Then you've got the effects it has on the gut microbes. There's no fiber in most of these foods because they're foods that are definition of an ultra-processed food is something that's started as real food, but they've stripped out all the outer casing of the plant or the seed or whatever it is, just using the inside bit of it. They've mushed it up, superheated it in factories, and then they sort of glue them together to make it look like food. And that process takes out all the fiber, which is what feeds your gut microbe. And the outer layer also contains most of the nutrients, most of the helpful chemicals in the body. You're relatively nutrient deprived, which may have some effects on hunger. And we know that lacking fiber is really important for suppressing hunger as well. And then finally, there's chemicals in the food itself that allow it to be glued together. These are called emulsifiers. And there's chemicals that are added to give it a shelf life of a couple of years, preservatives, chemicals, and also colorants and flavorings and artificial sweeteners. And most of these have now been shown to mess up our gut health. And by that I mean they interfere with our gut microbes in their normal function. So they can't be broken down by them because they're not found in nature. So many of these artificial sweeteners came from the petroleum industry. And so your poor little microbe tries to break down the sucralose or the whatever it is, aspartame, and bangs its head against it and then produces some funny chemicals, which studies have shown can be pro-diabetic. So they might increase your blood sugar levels and act in ways that no one had ever thought possible, because we always thought these things were inert. So they're the sort of four main ideas of why these foods are not equivalent to the same calorie real food. And that's why the food companies are so desperate to keep the calorie concept alive. And they can promote their foods as low in calories, therefore healthy. And they're very happy to then add in fake vitamins and other chemicals to make it look like it's healthy. But they want to focus on calories, so that's all that counts. And that distracts us from the fact that we should be eating higher quality food. And that's really what's killing us.
Okay, I have a few questions on that, and then I'll bring us back to what should we be doing for weight loss if that is indeed our goal. Emulsifiers. I've heard you say that these sort of bond together our microbes in our gut and make them feel like I feel like you said like walking in mud or something like that. Is that true?
Well, conceptually it's true.
They're not going for a hike.
I don't think we're actually walking in mud, but scientists who've studied this have found them, they tend to clump together more than they would otherwise do. So they're less mobile. They then produce these abnormal chemicals they wouldn't normally do. They can't feed off them in the way that they would be, so it harms them, and then as a reaction they seem to produce these chemicals. So you've got to think of these microbes as little chemical factories, all of them very different, thousands of different ones, all of them capable of producing different sets of chemicals, which are generally healthy for us.
And what would those chemicals do? Like, is that like the serotonin that's going to your brain to make you happy?
It's everything from serotonin in your brain, from GABA, which makes you more relaxed, like a Valium tablet, all the B vitamins that are really good for your nervous system, to other ones that will digest other plants and break down some of these things further. They have been shown to increase rates of GLP-1, which is a natural gut hormone that can actually reduce hunger, as you see in the Ozempic type drugs. So they do a whole range of things that we're only just beginning to discover. And so they're like a treasure trove of a pharmacy for us if we can use them right and treat them right. And at the moment, by feeding them with these artificial foods, we're messing that up, and they're producing the wrong chemicals, wrong signals going to our brain, altering our mood, wrong signals making us hungrier rather than full, and other signals signaling us to put on weight and increase our risk of diabetes. Everyone needs to know about gut microbes and gut health if they're going to seriously make a big change to their diet and be healthy.
Would you say that our gut microbes are more impacted by the things that we are adding in that are negative, or the things that we're maybe not eating? So would you say that eating things like these emulsifiers, these ultra-processed foods is more negative, or is it just that we're missing the fuel that they need? We're missing the stress-relieving practices. We're missing all of these things they need to thrive.
I'm going to hedge my bets and say both, right? Because at Zoe, we've been collecting data. We now have data on over several 100,000 people's guts, and we've looked at their diets and what's good and bad. And we've worked out the best way to assess a healthy gut is a ratio of good to bad bugs. So it used to be thought there was just the number of different ones, what we call the diversity or the richness. But it turns out that you can be quite diverse, but have a number of guys in there you don't like. They're not good. They're inflammatory.
And where do those come from in the first place?
They are floating around the air. Normally, they wouldn't do very well if the environment isn't favorable to them. But if you suddenly go on a junk food binge and you're just eating burgers and fries and Cokes, and you'll make your environment more what we call pro-inflammatory. That subtly changes the acidity level. The subtle changes mean that these microbes suddenly flourish, whereas the normal ones that we were evolved to live with, the sort of good guys, have got nothing to eat. And they're being elbowed out by these ones. And similarly, if you just don't have any fiber or anything that reaches down below, apart from these, say, bits of fat and things like this that are coming from your junk food diets, you won't get any of the good guys in there. If they're doing well, they keep out the bad guys as well. So it's a constant war going on inside your gut between good and evil. You can suppress the nasty ones, but they still stay hanging around, just waiting in case you go on a wild binge and they can recover. This is what we're finding. So it's the ratio of the good bugs to the bad bugs. We've now found that the average American diet does contain too many bad bugs that are just there. And even we find differences between Americans and British guts. We're pretty bad in Europe.
That's so funny, because in America, I feel like we hold Europe up on a pedestal. We're like, oh, I went to Europe and I ate all the bread and I effortlessly lost weight and just tried this French diet and all of these things. But you're like, no, they're bad in Europe too?
They're bad, but they're not as bad.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, good to know.
And
we're number one.
Yeah, and the UK is the worst in Europe.
Okay. I feel like the UK is probably the most
similar to the US.
Similar to the US, yeah.
Yes. So we have that in common. But if you go to southern Mediterranean countries, you go to Italy, Spain, south of France, Portugal, you got rates of ultra-processed food. Around 15% of the food they're eating is that kind of food, whereas in the UK and the US, it's around the 60% mark. So it's 4 times more in the average population, and it's worse and it's even worse in children.
And do you see a difference in their gut microbes as a result of that?
Yes.
Wow.
So there seems to be a different correlation between this.
So just to be clear, there's the food you eat and the impact the food is almost directly having on your body in the moments that you're eating it. But then there's the microbial environment that the food you're eating is cultivating, which is going to have these longer term impacts on your health. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And is it possible for anybody to fix their microbial environment?
Absolutely, yes. We've seen this now with all our Zoe members who've either changed their way of eating to a Zoe plan personalized around them, which is mainly a plant-based shift, so that they're eating many more plants than they have been before. They increase their microbiome sort of regardless of what age they were when they started, regardless of their baseline state. Everybody can improve their gut microbes. Now we've got this huge database, we can actually give some personalized advice about particular foods that will boost your gut microbiome as well.
And would you say that our gut microbe is the number one thing that we should be considering when it comes to like, is this food healthy for me? Or are there other factors we should be considering as strongly?
I think if you only had one thing to consider, say, will my gut microbes like this? You can't go far wrong.
Okay. And is there anything that they don't like that is a whole food? So you said ultra-processed foods, our microbes don't like that. Do they like dairy? Do they like meat? What don't they like and what do they like within the realm of the whole food world?
To answer that, I think we need to move away from this idea of every food is absolute, because the way you eat it tends to be you put something on a plate during a day and you build up, this is what I've eaten during the day. And if you have dairy or meat, you're saying, well, if I didn't have dairy or meat, what would I have put on my plate? We need to reflect and not so much as have foods as good or bad, but also what would be a sensible, better swap. People ask me all the time about meat. What's my view on meat? You're probably going to ask me. The research evidence, the epidemiology suggests that if you eat a small amount of meat that's healthy meat, it's not particularly bad for you, right? It's fairly neutral and certainly has some, good balance of protein and vitamins. But if you eat too much meat or you eat processed meat, even in small amounts, that's bad for you. The question is it the meat itself that's doing that, the good quality meat that's doing it? Or is it the fact that if I've got a big steak on my plate, I've got no room for different plants. I've got no room for the 30 plants a week that I'd like to be eating in order to keep my gut microbes happy. So I think it's this balance and different way of thinking about food, the balanced food that my microbes are receiving in that 24 hours or over the week, that's going to be important. And you can't do that if you're drinking pints of milk or you're having lots of steak or huge amounts of chicken. You really can't provide the rest of it to your gut microbes in the quantities they want. So that's why it's about moderation in those things. My view of dairy is that actually it's pretty neutral. I mean, the latest evidence on milk drinking, for example, is that it doesn't really protect your bones. It helps kids grow a little bit, but might make their bones actually more fragile. It doesn't help women at the menopause as much as we thought it did.
I feel like this is my very uninformed opinion, but is there any research on it impacting hormones in a negative way? Because I was one of those kids that was raised on a ton of milk because that was, it was the got milk commercial heyday. And I got my period really young. I feel like I just had these like downstream detrimental hormonal effects.
There's some evidence that it induces puberty earlier.
I am the some evidence. I'm the N of one.
And you might grow faster and it stimulates some of these growth hormones that you don't necessarily want triggered so fast.
I kept waiting.
No. Well, that's because your puberty came in too early and stopped you growing.
Wait. So if I perhaps hadn't drinking the milk, I could have been taller? There's
some evidence that's true. I think there's probably likely to be a personalized approach to this, but there's definitely evidence that milk has this effect. But in general, over the last 50 years, milk has come and gone in popularity. It depends when your parents, were in that phase of it being fantastic or not. My view is that if it's not fermented, doesn't have live microbes in it, have it if you really like it, but otherwise it's definitely not key to healthy life after breast milk. I mean, breast milk really is wonderful, but drinking other animals' breast milk isn't quite so good.
Okay, so two questions there. One, if you do really like it, it's not probably causing you a lot of harm either, though. Like if you do really like it, you're putting in your coffee, it's probably not causing a lot of harm.
Correct.
And then second question there, raw milk. It's a big topic online these days. You said if it's not fermented, if it doesn't have those microbes in
It's
it.
now political, isn't it? Raw milk.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. So if you're willing to wade into that, I would love your thoughts, because people say, yeah, it has these live enzymes, it has these microbes, that's why it's so good for you. What is your take on that?
If you're really into raw milk, which I'm not, I would prefer people had fermented milk, and they could have pasteurized milk that you then ferment and make kefirs, or you're making yogurts. And these are so much safer, so much healthier. There's so much more research behind it. Go for that. This obsession with somehow raw milk being wonderful for you. All I'm aware of is that, every now and again you get people dying with various diseases. It's rare, but it does happen, and there's no real recorded benefits. So I would rather that the American public were focused on, let's have more fermented foods in our diet, where in a controlled way, you're getting microbes in there that are making that food safer. They're microbes that have evolved to go into food and change the acidity to keep away all the other bugs and fungi and things like that. They've now proven benefits on our body, and we're just not eating enough of them. We're not drinking enough of them. People just don't think about it in that way, and we've got distracted by this raw milk argument.
My issue with the raw milk thing is I'm like, even if there were benefits, which like you, I haven't been able to find research that conclusively proves that there are benefits, but even if there were, I feel like every benefit people claim for it, you could get in another way, and that way wouldn't potentially have this negative effect, this potential negative effect. So I'm kind of like, if you can get this benefit some other way, why are you doing it in this scarier way?
Absolutely. No, I agree. But also it comes back to this, what the first question you asked me, what's the biggest misconception? Is, well, there's some wonder food, or all I got to do to be healthy is to drink raw milk. Clearly nonsense.
Yeah.
And so that's just another great example of people putting too much faith in one idea and losing the big picture. And we all need to keep the big picture, this much more holistic view of our health, which means, how do you keep your gut microbes happy? If they're happy, they're going to be pumping out the right chemicals. They're going to be keeping your immune system in this perfect state of harmony. And it's that, not randomly getting, some bit of breast milk from some animal that's going to be the magic cure. It just doesn't make sense.
Let's dive into the meat conversation, because I think that ties in nicely with the weight loss conversation, which is that a lot of people are trying to consume a lot of protein because it keeps them full. They've been told they need that to build their muscles. They've been told they need that for longevity. And I think a lot of people are, whether or not they're kind of consciously admitting it or not, doing it for the weight loss benefits of it. It feels really hard to get the 30 grams of protein per meal that you hear about from plant sources. How should we be thinking about that?
The first thing is to dispute whether you need 30 grams per meal, which would be 90 grams over a day, unless you were a 90 kilo individual, very big, right, which you're not. So you've got to question some of those figures. And also, this is a big debate in the field about whether you need anything more than, 1 gram per kilo of weight. Recommendations about less than around 0.8. If you're a 70 kilo person, you probably need 50 is the recommended amount you'd need anyway. And if you want to be safe, you might have to go to 70. So you don't need excessive amounts. So there's a big push at the moment to give people far too much protein.
Where do you think that comes from? There's a number of doctors who are saying that as well.
It comes from a number of doctors, it comes from a lot of companies, but I don't know if you've noticed how much money is being made by selling protein to people. And it's usually excess from the dairy industry that can't sell the milk like they used to, because we're not drinking as much milk. So they've got all this waste product from cheese products in other foods and these mountains of whey protein they've got to get rid of somehow. So they start a massive campaign to tell the average American they're deficient in protein. Therefore, this is really crucial for them. And so you're surrounded by protein drinks, protein snacks, protein foods, protein supplements. Basic science shows that actually the average American is 90% are not deficient in protein. They're getting quite enough of it, but they are deficient in fiber. 90% are deficient in fiber. So there's nobody making money out of fiber. And that's why everyone's being indoctrinated into this being a major problem in the health. And the benefits of protein being massively oversold. There's an idea if you have lots of protein, if you exercise the next day, you're going to get big muscles and you'd be really ripped. But your body can't store protein. So if you're not exercising for 3 hours that day, you're just going to pee it out, or any excess will go to fat, gets changed into fat. And people don't understand that. They think it's just like free calories. It's like an artificial sweetener. Use it or lose it. But no, it uses it or it stores it.
What about in terms of building blocks for your cells and your muscles and longevity? And those are the reasons that I'm trying to consume protein.
Everyone needs to consume protein, and we generally find that there is a window of whether you're vegetarian or meat eating, you're going to have a percentage of protein that's hard to change much. Even vegetarians and vegans are having regular protein because plants contain protein. Every time you have a pasta dish, or you're having some grains, or you're having bread, you're eating protein. Sometimes up to 8% of it is protein. So it's very hard to avoid protein, even if you're not thinking about it, because we've been told it has to be a protein bar, has to be an egg, or it has to be meat or fish, otherwise it doesn't count. But that's just not true. So if you have a variety of plants, you will get all the protein you need. You have to have a wide variety to get the perfect balance. If you're vegan, you've got to pay a bit more attention. It's not as straightforward. You've got to be a healthy vegan to get the right proportion. But we don't have to be obsessed with it unless you are very elderly and frail and not eating well, unless you're on a really restrictive diet. That means you're not getting enough actual food, so even those percentages are down, or you're really into professional bodybuilding and you're doing this several hours a day, in which case you probably do need extra. But as I said, 90% of the population is being conned. They don't need that extra protein, which doesn't help your microbes, and its ability to stop hunger has been oversold. They're based on a really small number of studies that weren't very convincing. The studies I've read suggest that fiber is much better at reducing hunger than actually having protein. And I think that's borne out because the manufacturers have put all these proteins in these drinks. They wouldn't be adding it all if it was stopping you going back and having seconds. They know it. They can keep selling as much of these snack bars and these drinks as they want.
One of the things that the people who are arguing for these more protein-heavy diets, though, say is that the proteins that are in plants, like beans and quinoa and things like that, actually contain chemicals or contain things that harm your gut health, that harm your hormone health, that harm all of the things that we're talking about trying to optimize for. What are your thoughts on that?
It's rubbish. There's really no evidence that any of these things. These are all these voices in nutrition, many of them not experts, they're just influencers who come up with some idea. Of the 800 chemicals in a bean, there's one that they've singled out. If you put it into a test tube, it could stop you absorbing some vitamin or something like this. What we find in real life, that either is a trivial difference or it's not true, for example, when you cook the foods. So you're not having them raw. And that's the case with beans and things like this. And there was a whole big story about lectins being dangerous and anti-nutrients and all this stuff. Again, these are just fads. People need to look at the much bigger picture of, people who are eating lots of grains and lots of beans, and they're super healthy. They have reduced rates of heart disease. They're much better off than people who are obsessed with some of these theories and, excluding all this stuff from their diet. So, and again, the more you exclude from your diet, the less healthy your gut microbes. You're fighting against yourself if you keep following up all these false trails. And humans are omnivores. We were designed really to eat all kinds of stuff. Before it was fake food, obviously, but we should be able to eat pretty much everything as long as it's mixed and varied and small amounts of it. And if beans are quite a common thing. People say, I can't eat beans, it bloats me. I think virtually everyone can eat beans. You just got to get used to them again. It's probably because you've got no decent gut microbes inside you to break them down, and therefore they struggle and produce too much gas. Constantly discussing this, people. But if you slowly build those amounts up again, you can eat all these foods, and they're all healthy.
Is there any argument to the idea that plants have these defense chemicals to prevent animals from eating too much of them, to protect themselves, and we are consuming these defense chemicals and having any sort of negative impact on our body?
It's the opposite, actually, that these defense chemicals are actually really useful for us. The general term for these chemicals is polyphenols. They have general purpose. They're not just used to deter predators. They're used to protect the plant against sunlight and cold and wind. Often they give the plants those amazing rich colors, dark blues and purples, and that they're a particular type called anthocyanins. But this whole family, we used to call them antioxidants. But we now know that they don't generally act directly on our body, but our microbes consume them and use that as an energy source like rocket fuel. The more polyphenols you're ingesting, these defense chemicals, and these are in foods that we've been eating for thousands of years, like high quality olive oil or tea leaves or chocolate or coffee, nuts and seeds and berries. They contain high levels of these defense chemicals. And every study done properly shows these are healthy and beneficial for us.
Can I ask a quick sidebar about olive oil? The first time I told my husband, I just done a podcast about ultra-processed foods, and I was like, here's why ultra-processed foods are interacting with your body differently. And he was like, is olive oil an ultra-processed food? And I was like, I don't think so. Everybody keeps telling me how healthy olive oil is. It's the main thing that we cook with in our house. And he's like, yeah, but you take the olive and you're stripping out the fiber and you're pressing out the oil. So you're kind of doing, in essence, a very similar thing to the things that you're talking about being negative with ultra-processed foods. But then why is olive oil good for us?
Olive oil is a processed food, not an ultra-processed food. Nearly all the foods we eat, apart from, say, raw fruit, are processed to some extent. So butter is processed or cheese is processed. Yogurt is processed. Because you're combining two things together.
Okay.
But if you actually see how extra virgin olive oil is made, which is the high quality olive oil, essentially you're just putting the olives into a press and you separate the stone from the grape, and then you squeeze those grapes until you get the juice. And you can do that under certain temperatures and under gas, but essentially it's a mechanical process. It's only the cheap olive oils where it's not called extra virgin, or it's not even called virgin, it's just standard olive oil. Then you can get chemical solvents dissolving the skin and separating things to get the very last fragments of everything out of it, the real dregs. In some cases might be considered ultra-processed.
If we're like at the store and we're trying to figure out like what's good for us, what's not good for us, and it's like, well, the olive oil is okay because maybe it didn't need this chemical process to do it, but this quinoa might not be okay, or maybe this quinoa is okay, but it's in a bag, but it's not in the produce section. Like, how are we actually figuring out along the spectrum of like what is okay for us when it's been processed and what is not okay for us?
Well, separating processed and ultra-processed is really important because, as I said, nearly everything's processed to some degree, and that's perhaps why your husband got a bit confused. Ultra-processing means that you take the original plant and you extract bits of it, discard a lot of it, and you mix that with another extract of another plant or another extract of something else and some juice from something else, and you come up with some new creation that you would then put together, stick with glues, with emulsifiers, add a bit of coloring, add a bit of texturizer, some gums, and in the end, you make it look like something else. You know, imagine how cornflakes are made. Corn doesn't look like that. Biscuits and cookies and things like this. So it's extracts of food that are reassembled to look like real food. And so if you bear that in mind, then the word extract is if you look on the ingredients on the back of the pack, you see a long list of ingredients, right? So that's the first sign that something is ultra-processed. If you just had, olives, that's it, right? Well, you say, okay, well, that's not very ultra-processed because there's nothing added. But if you had a mixture of olives, and then you had maltodextrin, we've got some starch in there, we've got some colorant, we've got some sweetener, we've got some canola oil in there, we've got some palm oil in there, we've put it together into this magic vegetable thing, but because it's got some olive oil, they've got to put olives on the front and make it look like olive oil, you're pretty sure that's ultra-processed.
What about something like white flour? Where does that fall on the spectrum? Like, I feel like I'm good on Fruity Pebbles, which I love so much. Probably not that great for me. Like, I can read the ingredient list and be like, okay. But olive oil, I'm like, I know it's good for me, but it's having this processing happening. And then white flour, I feel like is really demonized in the healthy food world because it's been separated from the parts of it that are healthier and all these things. But it doesn't have the gums. It doesn't have the emulsifiers you're talking about. It doesn't have the long ingredient list. So how are we thinking about something like that?
The rules for processing and ultra processing are still being drawn up, but currently in the research literature, plain white flour would come out as a processed, not an ultra processed item, because the core of it is the real thing. They've just stripped the other stuff out, but they haven't added anything else to it. If they'd combined it with something, or they'd added something to it, it would then become ultra processed. Doesn't mean it's healthy. Not everything that's processed is healthy. At the moment, qualify as something that's totally industrial, because they've been making white flour for hundreds of years. They didn't need the invention of some factory to do it. They can do it much faster now. But mills used to separate white flour and the outside husks. They've been doing that for 500 years. So I think that's just standard processing.
Do you think that bread is part of a healthy diet?
Most bread that we eat is not. If you look at the average bread that Americans eat, it is probably the main source of their fiber, which has some benefits. Unfortunately, the average American is only getting less than half the amount of fiber they need. And coffee is the other big way they get fiber, actually.
Coffee?
Yes.
The liquid?
The liquid coffee, yes. A filter coffee has about 1.5 grams of fiber in it. If your average American has 3 cups of coffee, they're getting close to 5 grams of fiber, which is about a third of their daily intake.
Wow.
So there's more fiber in a cup of coffee than in orange juice.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, we're going to come back to coffee later because I'm going to let you go off on how much you love coffee. But
bread is a problem. I don't want to demonize it because it may, for some people, their only source of fiber. But there's a huge range between good bread and bad bread. And most of the bread is cheap. It's it's super sugary white flour that has virtually hardly any fiber in it. And if you look on the back of a pack to say what you're looking at, you're looking for the ratio of carbohydrate, how many grams of carbs and sugars there are in there compared to the fiber. And generally, I was doing this the other day in some of the stores, even what looks like a healthy bread has, say 40 grams of carbs and less than 1 gram of fiber in it. So it's got a ratio of 20 or 40 to 1.
And what are we looking for?
You'd be looking for something like 5 or 6 to 1.
So would that be like I call it like German bakery bread?
Yeah, so the best stuff is things like the pumpernickel, the rye breads. These are really dense, but just because it says stone ground or whole wheat, or it doesn't always, you have to look at the label to be sure what it is. And often they can be made to look brown just by adding some food colorant. Or it might be natural food colorant because they use a bit of carrot juice or something to make it look browner and healthier. That's a real something where people can just, by making some swaps, can really improve their health. Yeah, I've certainly, since I started using my Zoe glucose monitor and seeing the effect of bread on it, I make my own sourdough with rye now. And I have to be really sure if I buy stuff from a store what I like. But, in a restaurant, I'll still have it as a treat. I know it's going to be, bad for me, but sometimes, it tastes great. But have it as a rare treat, not as a regular staple, because it's really not a good thing because it gives us such a high sugar burst with very little fiber.
And I look for sourdough bread when I get bread. Would you say that's worth doing or no?
Not these days because there's no rules on it, because sourdough bread, they can fake it in the shops.
What about from like a bakery, like a local bakery?
If you trust it.
Okay. But if you can actually get a good long fermented sourdough, that is going to be better for you.
It's going to be better, but it's not necessarily going to be healthy because it still depends on the flour they've used and how much fiber is in that flour, how much of the original husk is still there. You can have some delicious sourdoughs but they're made to make them nice and fluffy and airy. They often have a bit more white flour in there, rather than it being too dense. They can still give you a sugar spike. It might be slightly less than otherwise, but I think that a lot of people being fooled by the sourdough label.
Okay. So the thing we should be looking for is the fiber to carb ratio.
Yeah. The more fiber, the better. The less you're going to get a sugar spike, the less you're going to feel hungry after eating it. All these other things that follow. So we probably eat too much bad bread generally.
But it's so delicious.
It is. It is. It's one of those things. But, and I think, when you go out for a rare treat and there's a crusty bit of bread on the table, I'm just like everyone else. I'm a sucker for it.
Yeah, it's so good. Going back to the meat conversation, another argument that people make towards eating meat is that type of protein is more assimilatable by your body. Your body can use that protein more because essentially the animal has eaten all these plants, pre-digested them for you, and then you're consuming that protein. What do you think about that?
It's a nice idea, but there's no science to back it up. That if you're eating a variety of plants, you're getting the same amino acids. You're not getting them in exactly the same proportions, but that's why you shouldn't just eat one type of plant. That's why if you only ate beans, you wouldn't have the right ratio of the amino acids. But if you're eating a whole range of legumes and you're eating grains in quinoa and other pulses, mushrooms, you'll be getting everything you need in exactly the right proportion. That doesn't really stand up. All it's saying is that if you only had to eat one thing and you wanted to get all your protein, a small bit of meat will give you that in the right proportions. But if you are eating a variety of vegetables and fruits, you'll be getting everything you need.
What would you say to somebody who said, I upped my protein and all of a sudden I was able to lose weight, I had more energy, I was experiencing all of the positive benefits that people online were telling me I would experience?
I'd say great. Anecdotes are fantastic, but you can have an anecdote for anything. You can say, I gave up protein and I feel marvelous. It's very difficult for anyone consistently to double their protein intake consistently and eat in a healthy way. Body keeps coming us back to, reasonable amounts of protein. And the fact that if you're eating a normal diet, whether you have fish or meat with it, you'll still be getting plenty of protein. I think that's what the general public doesn't really realize, that, if you get these grains, as I said, things like different colored quinoas or bulgur wheat, whole grain pastas, you're getting 6 to 8% of that is really good protein.
Does meat have a negative impact on your microbes?
It does if it's highly processed, burger type meat, or you're just eating lots of bacon or salamis and these things. And this definitely associated with increased cancer risk. But most of the studies, they haven't really force-fed humans bad meat for a long time to see what happens. They have done it to mice, and they certainly have adverse consequences. So I think...
But good, like grass-fed meat, pasture-raised chicken, things like that, do you think that would have a negative impact on one's microbes?
So if you're excluding 90% of the meat in the US that has, hormones and antibiotics in it, eating small amounts of good quality meat, I think is not unhealthy for your gut microbes. And there's some evidence. We've just done a study, again, on the Zoe members, comparing vegans, vegetarians, omnivores, looking at their gut microbes. And the people with the healthiest gut microbes can be in any category.
Okay, that's helpful.
So I think we mustn't get obsessed with the idea the only way to be healthy is being a super vegan.
Yeah.
But if you are a meat eater or a fish eater, you've got to make sure you leave enough room on your plate every day for all this rich variety of plants and having other fermented foods and things like this, which is the sort of problem.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful takeaway. It's not about what is occupying that space. It's about what is missing because that space is occupied. So if you're going to include the thing, make sure that you're including all the other stuff.
Because, once you've eaten a certain amount of meat a month, the excess doesn't go anywhere. You can't store the protein anywhere. You can't do anything with those amino acids. It's really just taking up negative space in your body and on your plate. But a small amount regularly of good quality meat or fish is probably, perfectly fine for you.
Going back to the person who is trying to lose weight, they're saying, I eat all the whole foods. I do, the stuff that I feel like I'm supposed to do, but I'm still not losing weight. So that's why they're online scrolling, trying to figure out this solution and that solution. What would you say to them?
It's about changing your idea that I'm not trying to have a 6-week crash diet here, which in a way your body is always tuned to getting it back up to it. Sort of fooling it, slowly changing your gut microbes so they're more efficient, they're helping you, and you're slowly reducing those hunger signals so that over the course of 6 or 12 months, you have lost some weight and you're on track long term to be healthier. Changing your eating windows is also important. We did a big study, 140,000 people doing this. About a third of them managed to have eat in a 10-hour window. And those that did reduced their hunger pangs quite significantly by about 20%, eating the same amount but in a shorter time window. So not snacking late at night and things like this. So sometimes just about the way you eat, your patterns and your thoughts, as well as changing to away from ultra-processed food, moving to whole plant diets. We also found that by giving personalized advice to people, there might be some people that, for example, this is what we do with the Zoe test. You get your glucose monitor to see how you'll respond to a standard cookie. Some people, we had tenfold differences between people. So some people might be better able to tolerate the sourdough bread, and that doesn't give them a sugar spike. You might be in that category. Whereas others would get a big spike, and there you say, really, you shouldn't be having that bread, which might be healthy for your partner or someone else. So there's that element of personalization also is another incremental piece on top of that puzzle.
To go back to the time-restricted eating part, to the not snacking, from a mechanism of action perspective, that's because essentially you have these like sweeper cells that go through your gut and clean things up, correct? Or would you describe that differently? Can you explain why that's helpful?
Yeah, it's like a sweeper microbiome team. It's like the defense team in your microbiome outfit. So at night, they come out when there's no more food coming down at them. Then the other guys disappear because there's nothing for them to eat. So these guys come out and they start nibbling at the debris or your gut, the sugar on your gut lining. A cleaning team, they're coming out, they're vacuuming around, tidying it up. The mucus layer of your gut gets tidied up. So it's pristine and the immune system is working really well and it's detecting things and it's just keeping that efficiency there. It's like if you never cleaned your office, eventually it would all clog up and become a real mess. So you need the idea of this regimented team that comes out, and it allows your main microbes also to have a rest and a circadian rhythm. And so just like we need sleep, so our body also needs a circadian rhythm to maximize efficiency. By having a good gut lining, that is really good for our efficiency. It's good for our immune system as well. And increasingly, the immune system seems to be crucial to this whole process.
And so that's not snacking that much during the day, from my understanding, and then also just leaving enough time at night where we're not eating?
Yeah, the main thing is to leave a good gap overnight between your last time you eat, your last snack, and your first proper meal of the day. Somewhere probably between 12 and 14 hours is what you should be leaving, and probably the average American is leaving sort of 9 to 10 hours. And a lot of people do have late night snacks. They have milk and cookies or whatever it is. And first thing they get up, they'd have some cereal quickly as they're going out of the house. And that messes it all up. And particularly snacking, we did another study of our members, and it turned out that in general, snacking accounts for somewhere between 20 and 25% of all your calories. It's so quick, you don't quite notice it. So I'd tell everyone, if you don't need to snack, don't snack. Some people do, some people don't. And if you do snack, have it with nuts and seeds rather than some sugary artificial protein bar. If you are snacking, don't snack at night.
Okay.
Snack just after a meal or, midday after you've had your main meals. That's probably less harmful. So it's all about leaving a really good gap. When you do that, we've found with these 40,000 people that really did it a lot, their mood and energy improved substantially, and they weren't thinking about food as much. These are sort of little cumulative tips that all help get towards it. And no one of them is like the blockbuster that's going to change your life, but if you apply them all, then they will last you a lifetime.
I just want to make 100% sure that anybody who's listening and who's interested in weight loss specifically has action steps that they feel like they can go away with. What would be maybe 3 things that they should add in or stop doing if that is their goal?
Cut out ultra-processed foods, which make you hungrier.
And there's science behind that, like 100%.
100% science increases overeating by 25%. That's a good enough reason to stop that. Stop late night snacking and stop unhealthy snacking, so anything that isn't really healthy. I would also say increase the number of plants in your diet. Try and get to this magical 30 plants a week, because if you do that, you not only improve your gut microbes, but you're guaranteeing to get enough fiber. We know that if you get more fiber, that will fill you up more as well, much better than just protein. People forget that because there's just nobody promoting fiber. There's no money in it. So that's where I start. If you get the 30 plants a week, however you do it, having fun doing it, that's a key foundation. So I think those three things, cutting out the snacking, getting 30 plants, cutting out ultra-processed food.
And not counting calories?
And forgetting calories. If you're eating real food, you don't have to worry about calories.
What if your real food that you're eating is like 20 avocados a day?
Well, then you wouldn't be having your 30 different plants.
Okay, so if you're eating real food and you're going for the 30 plants, because that's what I was joking,
No.
but that is what people say is like there's these very fatty, dense real foods, and you could eat like almonds and avocado, and then you're eating like 5,000 calories a day, and then people online are like, well, no wonder you're gaining weight.
There's always some people that take advice as a bit too much to heart, and they say, okay, that scores really well, I'm just going to eat that, right? Of course, in the Zoe program, we score avocados and nuts really highly, right? And we do say, don't worry too much about overdoing it. But that's within reason. Yeah, I have nuts and avocados, but I don't have 3 avocados a day, and I don't keep adding them to everything I've got. So you have to have some balance in there. And that's why I'm stressing that if you're focusing on variety of different foods, it's very hard to then overdo it on one particular food.
Do you think there's any insidious ways, though, that high calorie foods that would lead to weight gain, even if they're more whole food, sneak in? I'm thinking about like cooking with a lot of olive oil all of the time or something like that.
You'd think so, but the evidence shows that's not true. So they did a big study of 7,000 Spanish people, followed them for 6 years, and they gave them like an extra liter of olive oil, it's a big bottle of olive oil every week. The group that had the extra olive oil, there were 3 groups. One really nothing extra, having vegetables and other olive oils, and other group had nuts. They had a third less heart disease and obesity and diabetes than the other group. So we know that even excessive amounts of this stuff, whether you put it on a salad or you cook with it, is not a problem. Which again goes back to this idea that you should be thinking about quality, not calories. And we've become too obsessed with the calorie count and not thinking about the other benefits that these foods have on our body, and how our microbes can transform a food into lots of different chemicals that have all kinds of effects we don't yet know about.
I think one of the things that I find hardest about trying to navigate the world of healthy eating is that the things that I'm trying to eat well for are things that are far in the distant future. Like I'm trying to eat to prevent cancer. I'm trying to eat to live as long as possible. And it feels like there's no results that I can see in my body that would lead me to believe that I'm having the proper effects by eating what I'm eating. Is there universal science in these areas that we should just be trusting? How should we be approaching something like that?
Well, you're either the person that will believe the long-term science studies, or you might be more skeptical and say, well, I want to feel better myself. What's interesting is when we've been following up the Zoe members who've changed their diets, we see the first thing they notice is an improvement, within a week or two in their mood and energy levels. That tends to tell us they're on the right track. So mood and energy is like the first thing that happens, and then we start to see changes in the gut microbiome over the next few weeks. And I think increasingly people are going to use those parameters which you can feel, mood, energy, maybe reduction in hunger, and then change in your gut microbiome. And if you've got all those in the right direction, you're on the right path, and you're fitting in with all those other studies that are done to say, okay, your immune system is now better, your metabolism's better, you're going to be losing internal body fat. That's going to reduce your risk of these metabolic diseases. Your immune system's better, therefore you're going to be fighting cancer much better than you were beforehand, because we know that immune system is now crucial for early detection of cancer, and We've all got cancers all the time, but our body's continually finding them out at a tiny, really early stage and beating them off and killing them off. So the idea that we're all preventing cancer every day. And so it's making sure your body's in the best possible state to do that.
Why do you think that cancer rates are rising at the level that they are, especially in young people?
I think the number one reason is probably poor diet. As I said, there's a real link between poor diet, poor gut microbes, poor immune health, and then risk of cancers. So our immune systems are just not able to function as well as they should be optimally. They should be hunting out these cells when they start going rogue and killing them off very quickly. But they're too busy worrying about the inflammation in their bodies, about junk food and about not having enough fiber and thinking there's all kinds of other stuff going on in their bodies. So I think that's the number one. I think we are surrounded by an environment that's pretty unhealthy. So I'm not discounting things like pollution and plastics and the general toxins that we get in big cities and things like this that probably is also playing a role. But for me, diet is still the number one reason that we're seeing these changes in cancers that we didn't see before.
I have a friend, and I feel like everybody has a story like this, where they were unbelievably healthy. Like they ate so well, and they still got cancer at a really young age. Is that just genetic, like bad luck of the draw?
Cancers at a really young age often tend to be more heritable than those in older age.
What about like 30s and 40s, which is where I feel like I'm seeing it feels so young to me, but I feel like I'm seeing so many more people get these diagnoses.
So there'll be a mixture of genetic predisposition plus something else that's happened, whether it's an infection, a change to their gut, something else that's on top of the gene that's made it happen. So the gene was predisposing, but in the past wouldn't have come to anything because those cells would have been mopped up by the immune system and something is distracting the immune system. Perhaps it's related to the epidemic of food allergies that we're getting at the moment that didn't exist 50 years ago, that our body's reacting to the wrong things. Again, suggests our immune systems are not as well trained as they were 50 years ago. All this junk food coming into them, they don't know what's real and what isn't, and they don't know what to respond to, what's friend, what's foe. And so that's my view, is that you got this genetic predisposition in those people. We're doing a big study between my group in London and a big group in the US to look at these early cancers of the colon, which have suddenly skyrocketed. Exactly.
Yeah.
So exactly as you said, people aged between 20 and 40 getting all these things which they never used to, and trying to work out how much of that is diet, how much of that is pollution, how much it is driving cars, whatever viruses, COVID, who knows what, these things are. It's some other trigger that's come in. And usually there's more than one cause. So, you might have to have the right genes, wrong set of gut microbes, plus something else happening to you, perhaps a bit of luck as well. To my mind, if we hadn't shifted our diet so dramatically in the last 50 years, we wouldn't be facing this. There could be a number of ways it happens. But I studied twins for 30 years, identical twins, and very often one would get one of these cancers and the other one wouldn't. And they lived their lives together. So
which suggests that it's maybe not exclusively something in the environment, something that can't be differentiated between the two.
It might have been some infection that one of them had at some point and the other one didn't, because they got the same genes. They lived for 18 years in the same house, but they have different friends. They might have got infections at different times. That might have affected their immune system. And we also know that their gut microbes, even in identical twins, are very different. That was one of the big sort of shocks for me when I was doing my research.
And is that because of what they were eating, or just they were born with different microbes?
Yeah, well, we're born with 0 microbes, so we acquire them during life. And depending on who had a cold virus first or second, who got ill, who got given antibiotics first, even identical twins, things happen a bit randomly. Who got a gastro infection, who didn't, they will change the gut microbes. So they end up being really not much more similar to you and I, which is about the only thing in identical twins that's really different.
Wow.
So that made me think that the gut microbes are really the key to a lot of these problems.
Okay, that's so interesting. So basically, it's like if one twin is getting breast cancer and the other twin isn't getting breast cancer, and genetically they're exactly the same. You're looking at all these other factors, they're exactly the same. And the only thing that's different is the gut microbiome. That leads us to believe that the gut microbiome is very deeply involved in all of these cancers and things like that.
Correct. And that really was the aha moment for me that made me shift from being a geneticist to being a scientist in gut health, saying, this has got to be where the answers are. It's not just in the genetics.
Do you feel like you've gotten some of those answers at this point, like concretely enough that you can say, eat this and this will reduce your risk of cancer?
I've got it broadly.
Okay. Which is the 30 plants, all of that, or anything more?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of generic advice now that is getting clear that we know what a healthy gut looks like. We also have done some studies in cancer and showed that people with end-stage melanoma, skin cancer, who are on these immunotherapy drugs which boost the immune system in order to fight the cancer, fantastic drugs. But whether they lived or died, the main difference between them was the state of their gut microbes when they started treatment.
Wow.
Most oncologists don't discuss that with their patients.
Is there like a crash course we can do in rebuilding our gut microbiome? Like if we wanted to do like 1 week where we're just trying to like go hard and be like, oh, I'm going to build up my gut microbiome for all these benefits. I'm going to replenish it, all these things. Like, is there something we could blast it with?
Yeah, well, as the thing we haven't mentioned, of course, as well as the 30 plants and eating the rainbow and this stuff is fermented foods. Hitting it hard with every fermented food you've got. And this is what I tell cancer patients. I'm not allowed to give specific advice, but I say, listen, build up your gut microbes however you can. You've got a short time to do this. And many of these patients don't have time because they're told, you've got to go on therapy in a month's time, whatever. They're given no advice from the hospital because they're only worried about the drugs. Avoid antibiotics because that could be fatal for you. If you mess up your gut microbes, they won't then respond to the drug. And, improve your gut health as much as you can. They're all different because some of them don't have appetites and it's hard. But I really push the diversity of plants, but fermented foods for me are the secret weapon for many people. So whichever ones you like, there are at least a dozen of them. Pick the, small amounts of them all and get as many different of these probiotic microbes into your system, which we know helps the immune system. So they've done studies on this now. It's proven. It's not just sort of folklore.
And do those probiotics actually make it to the parts of your gut, into your intestinal tract where they can
They do, yeah.
populate and make a difference?
There was an initial myth that they all got broken down in the stomach and none of them made it through. But there's no doubt now that you still get hundreds of millions or billions of them still getting through. And they do have an effect as they pass through. They don't necessarily stay there, but as they're passing through, they're having positive effects on your body.
What are they doing? Do we know?
We don't know exactly what they're doing. We think they're triggering the immune system in a way and also sending signals to the existing microbes there to produce healthy other chemicals.
So you're not like eating sauerkraut and then the probiotics in that sauerkraut are colonizing your gut. You're eating sauerkraut, the probiotics in that sauerkraut are going through your body. They're sending messages to your immune system. They're sending messages to your inherent microbes, and then they're going on their merry way.
Yes. I mean, some of them might hang around for a few days.
Okay.
There's some evidence of that, but generally they're not there for long. They're not designed to stay in your body.
Okay.
They're designed to stay on cabbage, So once the cabbage is gone, they're out of there, so they've got nothing to eat. They're very specialized.
Is it a problem that there's only like a few types of probiotics in fermented food, like lactobacillus? I'm not sure the exact type, but that there's only a few kinds and we need this really broad diversity?
Well, there's more diversity in fermented foods than there are in probiotic tablets, which most people are surprised by.
I am. You can see
You've
my
raised
face.
your eyebrows. Yeah. You'll get at least 30 types of microbe in, say, a kimchi or a kombucha.
Okay.
Which compares to a yogurt, you might only get 3. Milk kefirs, you've got between sort of 8 and 25. They all vary to different amounts, but if you mix them up, you're getting a pretty good range of 50 or so different microbes, and even different makes of kimchis will have different microbes in them and fungi and other stuff like this. So yeah, I'm a big fan of eating the whole range of fermented foods, and particularly if you're sick or you really need to give your immune system a really quick boost.
Or if we're afraid of getting cancer, would you say that's kind of your prescription? Because I think that's where I said I don't have a huge family history of cancer, but I'm looking around and I'm getting more and more scared.
Yeah, well, statistically, I think it's 1 in 3 of us are going to die of cancer. So it's something we should all be interested in. But it's this holistic message that, if you want to fight cancer, obviously don't do stupid things like smoke or, go and irradiate yourself. But keeping your immune system healthy is the best way to do that. And at the same time as fighting cancer, you're going to be reducing your rate of aging. So the two systems are really quite closely linked.
Are there any other things you would recommend that are different from what we've talked about in terms of keeping your immune system healthy? Any other action steps there?
A bit of exercise is good for your immune system. So every now and again, giving it a bit of a shock, stressing the system has been shown to improve your immune response. So exercise doesn't really help weight loss, and people get upset when I say that, but I'm a big fan of exercise because it's really good for your mental health, it's good for your immune system and many other systems in the body. Getting a good night's sleep is really crucial for your immune system as well. They've done lots of studies to show if you deprive people of sleep, their immune system is much less efficient and doesn't function. And so this comes back to this idea of this sort of holistic approach. All of our bits of our body need a work time and a rest time. So sleeping at the right time, not eating during that time, also really important. So exercise and sleep are the other key components as well as diet.
Are there any weird things that you do that aren't very widely known at all? Okay, let's talk about coffee. Here's your opportunity to talk about coffee. It's not weird.
You're saying I'm weird?
You're not saying you're weird, but I do think that coffee is not something that maybe everybody thinks of as a super health food, and you talk about it as if it is. So can you go off on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It should always be in the health food section rather than all the sodas and anything with vitamin C on the label, which just seem to be deadly. So coffee got a bad rap. I've been studying it since the 1980s, and I initially even wrote a paper, thought it might cause cancer. So I was definitely in the coffee's bad camp. But increasingly, bigger studies kept showing that it reduces your risk of heart disease quite consistently. There have now been studies of over 1 million people clearly showing that between 2 cups and 5 cups of coffee a day reduces your risk of heart disease by between 20 and 30%. So significant reduction. And we think that it's nothing to do with the caffeine. And people have got obsessed with caffeine. It's like you take any food and like we were talking earlier, but you like to reduce it down to one chemical. There might be 600 chemicals in coffee, but people just talk about caffeine. In some people, that's the reason they can't take coffee, because they're very sensitive to the caffeine. The rest of coffee is healthy, and it's a fermented food. So it's part of the process when you get the bean out, whether it's Africa or Costa Rica or wherever it is, you lie on the ground, and microbes ferment it, and they break it down and get those great flavors. We don't know if it gives the health benefits or not, but that actually produces even more defense chemicals, more polyphenols. So you get more complexity. So most complex drinks and things like this, whether it's chocolate, wine, coffee, are all fermented at some point in their life. So you've got the combination of all these defense chemicals, these polyphenols, in really high amounts, which give it that bitterness and that sort of astringency on your tongue. Plus you've got the fiber that's there from the actual bean.
And the fiber stays there through the filter process and all
Yes,
of
it's
that?
soluble fiber, yes. Wow. So the soluble fiber is there, it's measurable. And
5 grams per cup, did you say?
No, 1.5.
1.5.
But if you have 3 big American cups and, you guys love big portions, you're going to be getting 5 grams a day, which is more than a third of the average US intake. So that's why it's so important. It's probably the only thing keeping the Americans going. It's like the coffee.
And then I had another...
And even if it's caffeine-free...
Yeah.
So decaf still seems to be, in the epidemiology to still have a benefit on the heart. So even if you don't like the caffeine, it might be another reason to drink your coffee. And black tea just doesn't cut it the same way. It's not quite as good. Some evidence it might have a slight benefit, but if you don't like coffee at all, green tea is the stuff. The evidence is really pretty good that green tea has really good protective effects. Not so much for the fiber, but it's got the polyphenols.
I do matcha. Would that have fiber because it's the whole ground leaf?
Yes, that will have some fiber in it, yes.
And is that like, if I hate coffee, which I really, really do, I have to add so much sugar to it to drink it that I feel like it's probably net a loss.
Yeah.
Is matcha like a good second?
If you have good quality stuff and you have a lot of it, that should be doing you good. There just aren't the big epidemiology studies to prove it yet, but I suspect you'll be doing okay.
Are there any other foods that you feel like have an outsized positive effect?
I think mushrooms are a food that we don't really talk about much. When I was writing my book, Food for Life, I did a chapter on mushrooms and I got super excited because before then I thought, wow, apart from magic mushrooms, there's no real medicinal benefit to these guys. And I knew that, a lot of it being in Chinese medicine for a while, but didn't think there were many good studies. And the more I read about it, the more convinced I got that we should be eating many more mushrooms because they're not a plant. We're actually closer to mushrooms than they are to plants.
That's crazy.
Genetically.
That's crazy.
Because they're fungi and, they're this huge kingdom that they should be given much more prominence. So they have very different structure to plants. And so a lot of the things, when you eat them, you're getting a much greater variety of chemicals. So there are lots of studies now showing that if you are eating lots of mushrooms at the same time as you're having chemotherapy, you can improve your chances of good outcomes, etc. So again, its effect on the immune system seems to be really beneficial.
And is that any type of mushroom or just like the reishi and like the kind of fancier cordyceps, the ones you see in the fancy mushroom drinks?
It's sort of unclear. That there's no doubt that the lion's mane, reishi, these ones, that's when they've done most of the studies on, rather than
shiitake,
button mushrooms or field mushrooms. So depending on whether you want to use what studies have been done, pay 5 times more in the farmer's market for it or not, it's a bit up to you. I think they're all good. And probably having a variety of them makes sense as well, given the philosophy about diversity of different chemicals in them. So I used to think things like mushroom coffee were probably rubbish, but I'm starting to think, well, maybe there's something into this. It may be a trend, but not all trends are bad.
One of the biggest reasons I think there's a lot of confusion about what to eat is that you can find a study for pretty much anything online these days. You can search like a study that says like turmeric helps inflammation, and then you can find a study that says turmeric doesn't help inflammation. You are a researcher. You have written many papers. You've had many people cite your papers. Can you give us a little bit of advice to navigate that world and what to trust when it comes to research?
Very difficult. And I respect anyone who's tried and come unstuck at this. Don't believe some influencer who says something who's selling a product. That's the first thing. If you go to a site and they say turmeric is amazing, and here you go, you can buy a year's supply of turmeric, you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. And anyone who's offering you that simple single solution, it's got to be a holistic view. I would trust people who are scientists, who write papers, who have used to presenting evidence and having it rebutted in peer-reviewed journals, and will present proper referenced papers around it rather than just shouting about it in a loud way. It is a minefield out there, and you have to look beyond just the website, because many people say, oh, yes, we're backed by science, and you look and see what the science is. It's rubbish, but it's very hard for the public to tell the difference between bona fide science and real science.
Well, and it's hard because
you can buy yourself a journal. You can get into a journal now easily. They have these vanity journals. You just pay them $5,000 and they'll print any old rubbish and they'll actually write it for you. Very hard for the public to be able to sort that out. So you need to drill deeper. Does someone have real credentials as a scientist? Have they published, hundreds of papers in peer-reviewed journals? Does it make sense? They're not just offering this one wonder cure and take that bigger picture. But if people are worried, they can read my book, Food for Life, which I spent 6 years writing, starting from scratch, going to all the original references where you got an A to Z of foods and what I think the evidence is for each one of them and where the evidence is good and where the evidence is bad. And that's really how I did the work. And it would save other people time if they started from there and did it that way. But it wasn't easy even for me.
Well, and I think it's hard for people these days to even be like, well, do I trust him or do I trust this person who's saying something that's completely the opposite of him on a different podcast episode?
Yeah, but if it sounds too good to be true, it generally is.
Can you leave us with just one homework assignment, something that we could all do today to start to eat a little bit healthier and feel a little bit better?
I would tell people to look in their refrigerator, work out what in their refrigerator is ultra-processed food, stick it in the trash or put it to one side, and see how many fermented foods you have in there that you might be able to incorporate into your meals on a regular basis. For you and your family. Look in the vegetable rack and the fruit rack and sort of count up how many plants and think of other ways you might be able to get extra plants into your meal by, whether it's getting nuts and seeds or it's supplementing it in some way. Look inside what you're regularly eating. Just do a little quick inventory and see how you're doing. The chances are, you can make a lot of easy improvements fairly rapidly, and you don't have to get, it can be a slow progress. Move towards your 30 plants. Doesn't have to be overnight. That's one reason we haven't talked about this, but we've just produced a product that's 32 freeze-dried plants that you can buy called the Zoe Daily 30 that is a way of starting on this journey. A scoop of this has all these different plants, gives you 5 grams of fiber, and you can add it to whatever your breakfast is that day.
Wait, so Tim, I have to ask, because you said don't trust somebody who's sharing science that supports something they're selling,
exactly.
And you just shared science that supports something you're selling.
Yes.
What do I do with that?
Well, don't trust me, and don't trust me, I'm a doctor. But the reason you might make an exception for me is that we did a randomized controlled trial of this against a probiotic and against a dummy mixture in over 300 people. And we published this in a major journal. So
not one of the ones you can buy your way into?
Not ones you can buy for $5,000. No, they're one of the very top journals in the world. That's what we do at Zoe, and that's why I wanted to be involved in this company, because it really is everything we do, we test, we do a proper, serious controlled trial on it, because there's so little of that in nutrition, and that's the only way you can trust it. Otherwise, it's all about marketing, and you just listen to the person who's shouting the loudest. We decided to do that, which a lot of people said, well, Tim, you're against supplements, you're against vitamins, you're against all this stuff. Aren't you being hypocritical? So you're not the first person that said that to me. But a lot of people do find it hard to switch to 30 plants a week quickly, and they might be people listening might be in food deserts where they find it much harder than if you're living in London or LA to get hold of this food. So it's perhaps a good way of starting and just getting your mind set. Just see if your mood and energy improves, then you're on the right track.
Love it. Thank you so much, Tim.
Been a pleasure.
If you loved this episode, you will love the episode where I speak with 3 of the world's top doctors about their personal immunity protocols. It is called Ask the Doctor, an exact plan for when you get sick, plus how to prevent it in the first place. There is a ton of information in there about the role that your microbiome plays in your immune system and how to bolster it for maximum health. I will link it in the show notes so you can go and listen next. If you need even more motivation, come hang out on Instagram. I am at Liz Moody. It is a great way to get little reminders of what we're learning on the pod and tons of inspiring and always very real content from me. We also have our Liz Moody merch. We have a Novelty Rule sweatshirt, a Cirque Walk sweatshirt, and a Never Be the One to Say No to Yourself sweatshirt available at shop.lizmoody.com, and they are so cute. So do not miss out on those. When they are gone, they are gone. Okay, that is all from me. I love you, and I will see you on the next episode of the Liz Moody Podcast. Oh, just one more thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, a psychotherapist, or any other qualified professional.